Now, if you haven't watched the previous training video on absolute references, you want to watch that, otherwise this extension of it, called mixed references, may not make sense. Basically what a mixed reference is that it's taking a cell in a formula and saying, okay, of that cell reference, well, this one's D, column D, row 6, so it's D6, I only want part of that reference for the cell to be constant and not both of them. Let me show you. I'm going to come down here. And what I want to do is I want to go ahead and calculate the commission rate for quarter one for the north area. So we have our total sales for quarter one for all the areas, but broken down by the north. We're going to go ahead and type in equals and select the cell here and multiply, which is the asterisk, by the total sales for all the areas and hit enter. And then to go ahead and take a copy of that formula and move it down cell by cell, I can hover over the lower right hand corner till I can see the black cross, the autofill handle, and double click really fast. And it copied and pasted the formula, but I'm getting errors. As you recall in the previous training video, if you come down here and double click, you can see where the error is coming from. I mean, it's advancing row by row for that part of the formula, which is correct because we want to go down to the south. But the other part of the formula is advancing and moving away from the total sales for quarter one. It's now multiplying it by a blank cell, and that doesn't work. And then the next one down below, it keeps moving it down. As it moves down to 10%, this one also gets moved down to the text here. So when you multiply 10% by commission, the text, you get a value error. Then this one's 17% multiplied by the next one down, 300,000, and you don't get much of a commission. So we hit the escape key, come back here, and we say of the reference here, when we're moving within the same column, we want it to stay here on the same row, because as you notice when we move down, it didn't move outside of the column because we stayed within the column. So back to the formula here, let's come up here in the formula bar, and we want to tell it to stay, and there's the reference, D6, not in the same column because it's going to do that by default. We need to have it stay on that row, which is row 6. You can either type in the $, that's fine, or let me hit the back arrow to delete it. Click in front of D6 and just hit the F4 key a couple of times until it toggles through to give you the $, in front of the 6. That works. Hit enter and there you go. And then come down here. Now we can go ahead and copy and paste that down by clicking and dragging the autofill handle down, selecting any one of these, double clicking on it to make sure that it's referencing for the east its adjacent percentage, and then also still the total sales for quarter one. Fabulous, babes. Let's go ahead and hit the escape key. And now let's take that and copy it over to quarter 2, 3, and 4. So if you can quickly guess what's going to happen when I copy it over, it's going to update it from one column to the next because it's relative without us adding those absolute references, or in this case, mixed references. And then you can go ahead and take a quick guess what's going to happen. It's going to move it over column by column. For that part of the formula, that's great because it's going to move from this cell to that one, which is quarter 2, commission quarter 2. That makes sense. But because we don't have it set to stay in this column here, it's going to multiply the sales for quarter 2 by the commission for quarter 1. Let me show you. Hover over the lower right hand corner, click and drag and let go. And okay, again, anytime you get pound symbols, Excel's saying, look, because the column is so small, I'm not going to show you part of the numbers because then you may get erroneous thinking going, thinking, okay, when you hover over the cell, and you see part of it, maybe just the 7650, and go, oh, it's just 7,650 when it's a lot more than that. So it's not going to show you just part of it. Instead, it's going to put in pound symbols until you come up here in between the two column headers and click and drag and stretch it out far enough, or double click really fast to do an auto fit for the longest data within the column, and it's going to be the number here. So wow, double click on that, and you can see how it went over that part of the formula to the next cell, which is correct, but this other part should have stayed back here on the commission to take 12% and multiply it by quarter 2. So what do we need to do? Let's hit the escape key, come back here, and analyze it up here. So we want it to stay in column C, and that's where it's at right now, column C. So we want to go ahead and add a $, to say, hey, stay in column C. Then hit enter. Now that's really important that we add the mixed reference here, because when I click and drag over to the right hand side, well, first of all, it updates it correctly. When I double click on any one of these, it stays in column C. Hit enter. Then when I go ahead and select the range here, let me click and drag, and copy it down, and double click on any one of these, it's moving down accordingly, staying in the same column, and also moving over to the right, staying in the same row. So you may think to yourself, let me undo this and go, hey, you know what? It really doesn't matter. What if I just go ahead and add dollar signs to both? Let me go ahead and add a dollar sign. So now it's referencing permanently cell C9. Let me hit enter and then go ahead and take this and copy it over. It doesn't change the formulas, does it? No, because we're in the same row. But if I go ahead and click and drag that down, look at the numbers here. Because it's absolutely referencing that cell always and not a mixed reference where it says, hey, stay in the column but update when I go down, double click, it's always going to be referencing constantly that one cell when it should be moving down row by row. So let me hit the escape key and undo that. You can see the value behind mixed references where you don't say, hey, always focus on this one cell, when you just say, hey, when I copy over from one column to the next, stay in the same row, because it's going to do that by default. Or when I copy down row by row, stay in the same columns. So what we need to do is just to make sure that it's a mixed reference to say stay in column C, but by default we can get rid of the dollar sign for row 9, because when we copy over and we stay in the same row, I mean, it's not going to move, right? And then we can go ahead and hover over the bottom right hand corner, click and drag, and then double click. And because we didn't say reference that row always, we made it relative by not adding a dollar sign to it. When we copied it down, it went from one row to the next, so it can keep its numbers accurate here when it comes to multiplying this cell by cells for the third quarter to give us our commission. I briefly introduced the autofill feature in a few of the earlier training videos, and this is the actual training video on it, so if you missed them, well, I'm going to go over the basics here, and if you've seen them, I'm going to show you some more advanced options about the autofill. First of all, the definition of it is that the autofill is a quick way you can copy the contents of a cell or a range of cells into adjacent cells. So go ahead and select any cell or range of cells that you want to copy into adjacent cells, up, down, left, right. And then go ahead and hover over the lower right-hand corner of the cell that you have selected or range of cells until you see a black cross. And as you recall in an earlier training video, you get three options when you're moving your mouse around. Well, when you move it out into no man's land, you get the white cross. That means it's in selection mode. But when you get close to a cell or range of cells that you have selected and you hover over the border of it, then you get the black four-way arrow, meaning that you can go ahead and click and drag the contents of the cell or range of cells into whatever you want to drag that range into. And then when you hover over the lower right-hand corner, of course, you get the black autofill handle. That when you go ahead and click on it and you drag it down to the next adjacent cell, it automatically copies the contents over into that cell. Cool. Go ahead and hit undo, and you can do it again to the left, right, up, or down, just as long as the cells are adjacent. Even multiple cells, let go, and you get it copied over. Let me go ahead and hit undo. And as you recall in those earlier training videos, not only does it just copy the contents of a cell, but if it's like a formula, for example, let's go ahead and select a cell that has a formula in it. You can see up here in the formula bar, it's adding up the range here for the month of January for all the cells by these employees. And after we inserted the formula, I wanted to go ahead and have the same formula copied over into these adjacent cells so we can have the totals for February, March, and April. Instead of typing it in again or copying and pasting it, because the cells are adjacent, I can hover over the lower right-hand corner. Let me go ahead and click and drag and delete these cells. Hover over the lower right-hand corner and click and drag, and it'll automatically copy over not just the contents, but the other part of the autofill feature is that it looks for a pattern, because it's not going to exactly copy over what it sees here when it's noticing that the formula is going to be updating, or it's going to be relative to, in this case, the column that it's going to be in. Because the rows are going to be the same. It's always going to be rows 7 through 10 when we're talking about the range here, the totals for each month. So when we go over column by column, Excel goes, let's go ahead and update that formula so it reflects the range or the reference that's relative to the next column. Instead of C, it's now D. So you come over here. It's not going to be D, it's now going to be E, and so on. And the same thing happens when you're autofilling row by row. It's going to update that part of the formula as it goes down to the next row, but not the columns, because the columns will be the same. Which, by the way, let me go ahead and delete the range here. This only works for columns as a quick way to quickly autofill in. You can click and drag, but if you double click really fast, it actually does it only in vertical format here. And you can see that it automatically autofill down instead of to the right. Let me undo that. So you can't double click really fast on the autofill handle to automatically fill in and copy over the formula to the right here. but it certainly works when you're doing it by column. So if I delete the contents that I have here, the formula, and I've got my original here, and I want to copy that down, you can click and drag, but the shortcut for clicking and dragging the autofill is just to double click on that autofill handle really fast. And like I said, it only works vertically for your columns here. And when I mean vertically, I mean from top to bottom, and not, let me click and drag here, hover over here, double click really fast, bottom up. Let me go ahead and undo that. And like I said, it's not just one cell, it can be a range of cells. So if I click and drag and select the 4 cells here and click and drag down, it'll automatically just copy down the range that I have selected. So let me go ahead and undo that. Click off. Now we haven't talked about formatting yet, but it's important that we go over it at least now, because if you go ahead and apply formatting to a cell here, like the lowest minimum, which is the label for the lowest cells that was made in January, February, March, and April by these employees, and it was 110. If you go ahead and select the cell and you come up here on the Home tab to the font group and add some formatting so it's bold and red, and you go ahead and you copy that down, you get the little tag that comes up that says, okay, I filled this in, but you get some options. Do you want to go ahead and fill the contents without the formatting? If you select that, it brought the contents over, but just obviously not the formatting. Or you can say go ahead and just fill in the formatting, but not the contents. So when you type something else in, the formatting's applied, but again, the content didn't get copied over. Let me go ahead and hit undo, and hit undo again, and undo, and there we go. Undo it back to the beginning. There was the other option. It was called a FlashFill. We'll cover that in the next training video. That's AutoFill with attitude. So you can see that AutoFill's got many layers. It does simple copying and pasting, but it also looks for patterns, and it looks for those in formulas, and if it can find one, then I'll go ahead and copy it over, make it relative so it updates in the columns. It also looks for patterns in other areas like months. If I go ahead and I come over here and click on the cell that contains April and click and drag to the right, you can see in the pop-up before I let go, just below the black cross, May, and then June, and then July. Well, that's part of Excel's programming to make it a little bit easier on you to say, hey, if you're going to type in a month, I know months, and you want to autofill, then I'll just go ahead and quickly add in. As you go from left to right, you can go top to bottom or right to left, the other months that come after it consecutively, May, June, and July. It also works for Q1, hit enter. That's quarter 1, right? Click and drag down, and there's 4 quarters. What happens when I go beyond it? It goes back to 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, okay? It doesn't go to 5. So Excel already has some programming in it that it can look for patterns as far as months and quarters, and let me delete that. And for those that we want to set our own patterns for or find a pattern for, we can. Let's start with something simple. If we type in number 1 and we click and drag the autofill handle down, it's always going to copy 1. There's no pattern that Excel can look at and go, okay, the next one should be 2. But to establish that pattern, we just need to give the autofill feature something to work with, just a little bit more. So instead of 1, if the next one should be 2, then that's enough for autofill that if you select that range and click and drag down to go ahead and, as it can see, from 1 to 2 is just by 1. So when you go down to the next cell, it goes, well, the next one should be by 1 because you set the pattern here with the selected range from 1 to 2. Let's kick it up a notch. Let me delete that. How about if we went 1, 3, what's the next one going to be? Go ahead and select the range and click and drag down, and I'll do it every 3. And like I said, you get that little drop down options tag that you can go ahead and just copy the cells and say, no, I don't want to fill in the series. I just want to copy it, which means that I started off with 1, 3. It's copying it 1, 3, 1, 3, 1, 3. You can change that to fill series. You can change it to a fill formatting only, fill without formatting, and like I said, flash fill. We'll talk about that in the next training video. And there's the basics, at least for just simply copying and pasting, again, only to adjacent cells, and then copying and pasting, but with a pattern that Excel can recognize. And then the next one, flash fill, which is a part of autofill, but a little bit more nitty-gritty when it comes to looking for patterns to help you out when you're filling in parts of your database. New to Excel 2013 is the flash fill, which is part of the autofill feature. So if you haven't watched the previous training video on autofill, I recommend that you watch it so you have an idea what I'm talking about here. In any case, as I mentioned, it's part of the autofill feature, and to use it, you need to be next to a column of data that you want to change. Then, when FlashFill recognizes a pattern in it, it'll fill in a preview. So as you recall with AutoFill, you can go ahead and select a cell that contains data or a range of cells, and then to go ahead and copy that to the adjacent cells, just hover over the lower right-hand corner and click and drag either to the right or down or to the left and let go, and it copies it over. And if it recognizes a pattern, you can click on the drop-down arrow and get the different options there. Okay, let me go ahead and hit undo. Well, with FlashFill, you want to be in a column that's blank, and it'll look to the next columns over and look for a pattern when you start filling in that blank column. So for example, in here, I want to go ahead and type in the full name, or maybe just part of it, like last name, comma, first. So let's do Klinger, comma, space, Max, hit enter. And then to establish a pattern for FlashFill to recognize, let's go ahead and type in another one, app. Okay, so I start typing in AP, and it automatically gives me a preview of FlashFill. And let's make sure that this is right, because notice that for Appleman Obe, it's not Obe, it's Bob. So that didn't work. You can see the pattern down below with Wiggums, comma, Lancy, it's Clancy. So let me just go ahead and finish typing in the correct name here, and then type it in one more time so we can give it a more solid pattern for FlashFill to go off of. And the next one is Simps. Well, there we go. Type in the first couple of letters. And let's look at Wiggums Clancy. It's not Lancy. Looks good. Hit enter. And there you go, FlashFill. Now, if it doesn't automatically open up for you, FlashFill, by default it should be turned on, but if it's not, you can check it by coming up here, clicking on the File tab, going backstage to Options, and then coming up here to Advanced, and there it is. Check Automatically FlashFill. Click Cancel. If it's checked and it's not bringing it up, then we can go ahead and let's delete this and select Homer again. And you can hit Control E on the keyboard, the shortcut keys. That works. Or let me undo that. Come up here on the Data tab to the Data Tools group and click on FlashFill. Automatically fills in. That's cool. Let's go ahead and undo that. You can select the range and click and drag down. And then when you do that, click on the drop-down arrow to get the other options, the least of which is FlashFill, and that works. Okay, so you got some options there. So it's looking to the left-hand side to the adjacent columns looking for patterns, and how I went ahead and combined all that into this pattern, I can go ahead by the same token, extract it. So if I just want the first name, let's type in Max. Let's get a pattern, type in the next one. Oh, there we go. The rest will be Homer, Frank, and Britt. Hit enter, fabulous, and then of course last name, Klinger, Appleman, there we go. So the pattern that it sees for FlashFill to work is that, from what I can see, is that it's looking at the delimiter, the space between, well, the last name and first name when you start typing in the last names over here, so it can see that and automatically extract it. And then down below for one final example on FlashFill, I mean, it's got many uses. We're just covering the basics here. And in this case, we've got the phone that I want to put in the first three numbers in parentheses. So if I try to say, okay, look, this is how I want it, and then hit enter, and let's go ahead and do one more to give it a pattern. And then when I type in the first parentheses, let's check to make sure everything else is following in the same pattern here. Sweet, hit enter, there you go. The text-to-column feature is used to break up phrases or groups of words in a cell into their own cells. And in this example, we have the name here, and I want to break it up into last name and first name, where they get their own columns here, or their own cells. And to do that, what I want to do is go ahead and right-click on the column C header to insert another column. So I've got one for the last name and one for the first. Or if I want to keep this as the full name, this column is last name, and then I'd right-click to insert another column for the first name. I can do that. I'm going to go ahead and hit undo because I'm just going to have it as last and first. In any case, to go ahead and use this feature, select the range of data that you want to break up, and then come up here and click on the Data tab, go to the Data Tools group, and click on Text to Columns. Opens up a wizard that's going to ask us some questions. Based upon our answers, it'll fix this and break them up, the text within the column here. And the first one is that choose the file type that best describes your data. Is your data within that cell broken up by delimiters such as commas or tabs, or is it fixed? Like every 5 spaces, it breaks up to the next set of data, and it's always going to be 5. Well, it's not 5, I mean, because their last names are all varying, so thank goodness we have something that breaks it up. That's a delimiter. So let's go ahead and leave it as is and click on Next. And then the delimiter default is tab. It's not going to be that. It's a comma, right? So Klinger, comma, Max, Appleman, comma, Bob. So let's check that. And then notice down the data preview how it breaks it up. Well, before I go ahead and say that's okay, there's also a space, right? Appleman, comma, space, Bob. So we've got Appleman broken up, space, Bob. I don't want the space, so let me go ahead and choose the space so it collapses against it. So when that gets broken up into another column, it's not space Bob, space Danny, and so on. And go ahead and click Next, and it says, okay, where do you want to dump the data? You can see down below in the preview how it breaks it up and see if that looks apropos. And there we go, Klinger, Max, Appleman, Bob, their own separate cells, looks good. And with the destination being in B5, is going to dump, well, the first column in this range here, and then copy over the next column into the next column to the right. So click Finish, and sweet, there we go. And I can just come up here and say that's last, and this is first, all done. Now you might be thinking to yourself, hey, wait a minute, in the previous training video we learned about FlashFill. Couldn't that work? Yes, it could, but only in some instances where you may want to use text to column than FlashFill. And you'll figure that out as you, well, depending upon your database and what you're doing, which is going to work for you, because you can still go ahead and, undo, and then try to use the FlashFill here and say this one's going to be the last name. And even though I type in quite a few here, it doesn't look like it sees a pattern. Otherwise, it would have done an auto preview. So if I want, I can go ahead and select, well, the range here, and then click and drag down and see if I can do a flash fill. And click on the drop-down arrow and choose flash fill. Okay, well, that works. Just didn't give me the preview. But nonetheless, you're going to find out in your database that when you come to a certain point, if the flash fill isn't going to work, well, there you go. You have text to columns. When it comes to editing data within a cell, there are quite a few ways you can go about doing it. One way, for example, in cell A1, you can see that it says essential oils-US. Well, it's bleeding over into the next cell because there's nothing in there, but it's all still in cell A1. If I go to the next cell, you can see up here in the formula bar there's nothing because that's just bleeding over into that cell, but all the contents of essential oils-U.S is in the first cell there, A1. And you can see up here in the formula bar, it's right there. To go ahead and make changes to that, if I want to say essential oils-Europe, then I can just simply go ahead and type over it, essential, whoops, if I make a mistake, I can either go ahead and hit the backspace key, obviously, or just hit the escape key to start over again. And then just go ahead and type it in and hit enter. That works. Or let me hit undo. Since I already have part of what I want in there, I can go ahead and get inside the cell by double clicking really fast and then just come over to the latter part of it and select US and then go ahead and delete that and then type in Europe. Or let me hit the escape key so it doesn't accept my change there. With it selected, you can come up here if it's more helpful to you and work in the formula bar, especially if it's cut off because you have text next to it and you don't have the column here stretched out so far that you can actually see everything within that column. So the formula bar is helpful there as well, and you can go ahead and select it and type over it. Speaking of being within the cell here or in the formula bar, if you just want to replace a word, if you double click really fast, it'll select the entire word, and then you can just type over it. Cool. Let's go ahead and hit the escape key. And then when it comes to deleting a cell or a range of cells, go ahead and select your range, hit the delete key on the keyboard. I mean, that works, right? Or you can go ahead and hit undo, come up here on the Home tab to the Editing group, and there's the eraser, click on the drop-down arrow, and you get different options. You can clear everything out, which includes formatting, contents, comments, and hyperlinks, or just the formatting or contents and the other options. Let me go ahead and click off of it. And then if you want to insert symbols into a cell here, like let's say we want to register a trademark U.S. and then just go ahead and double click to get within the cell so the cursor's flashing, and then click at the end to insert the symbol. Come up here, click on the Insert tab, go to the group, click on the drop-down arrow to symbol, and we'll go ahead and we can register it, or there's trademark. Select that, click on Insert, and then click close, and there it is. Or the other options you get when you click on symbols to symbol is if you don't see it here when you're scrolling around, the symbol that you're looking for, you can click on the drop down arrow and you can go through the different types of fonts and the symbols that will be available. In fact, all the way down to wingdings, and get other cool little caricatures here, or special characters if you want a dash or a registered copyright section. There's the trademark. In any case, click cancel and hit enter, and there you go. When it comes to editing columns, rows, and cells, I'm basically talking about how you can insert and delete columns and rows, and also adding cells within a range that already has cells there, but you want to add some new cells without having to delete them, and then retyping them over here so you can get some blank cells here, or wherever you want to do that in your worksheet. In any case, to go ahead and insert a blank column or row, you can either right-click on the column header, and it's got the entire column header now selected, and in the shortcut menu, you get Insert, and it shifts the entire worksheet over a row, so I now have a blank row A, and what was A now becomes B, and B becomes C, and so on. And that looks kind of nice because I've got a little space from the left-hand side, or a margin as it were. Or, let's go ahead and hit undo. You can go ahead and click on the column header or click in any cell. You don't have to click on the column header. And the other option is to come up here on the Home tab to the Cells group and click on the Insert drop-down arrow, and you get columns there as well. So it doesn't matter if you select the entire column. That will work if you go to the Cells group there. Let me go ahead and hit undo. You can do multiple columns at the same time. So if you're like, hey, I'd like 2 blank columns right here and have these 2 columns pushed over, then go ahead and click and drag and select 2 columns and right click on the selection, go to Insert, and it pushes over as many columns as you had selected when you inserted it. And then of course to go ahead and delete it, you can right click and get the delete option, or again up here in the Cells group on the Home tab you got delete as well. You can go ahead and delete the selected columns, and we're back to where we started. And don't forget we have the rows. Click and drag row header 1 through 5, and right click is easier for me than coming up here in the Cells group and inserting, so we can insert there. That works. And then undo that, or right click to delete it. Now if you don't want to insert whole columns or rows, but maybe just open up some space within a range of data, for example, let's look at this section right here. If I want to move it over a column, I could of course go ahead and click and drag and select the range, hover over the border and click and drag it over one. That works. Let me undo that. Or I can go ahead and click and drag the range to the left of it, and with those cells selected, when I right click the selection and go to Insert, with these cells, do you want to shift them over to the right? And when they get shifted over to the right, whatever's to the right of it gets shifted over one as well. Or we can shift the cells down, and when these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 cells get shifted down, if there's anything below it, they get shifted down 6 as well. Or again, you can do entire rows or columns, but let's just do cells and click Okie dokie, and it shifts them over. And then by the same token, you can right click it to bring it back and say delete, and it says, okay, do you want to shift cells to the left here or up? So do you notice a pattern? When it comes to inserting for Excel, it's going to be shifting to the right or down. But when it comes to deleting, it's going to be pulling it up and or to the left. So do you want to pull the cells to the left here by 1 column, or do you want to pull them up by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 rows? Well, we'll do left, click Okie dokie, and it brings them back. And then to push my point home, if you go ahead and select 2 cells here, and you're like, I'd like to go ahead and push these over or down without deleting the data there, then right click the selection and Insert, and you can go down. Of course, it pushes it down. It doesn't make sense here as far as the database we've got laid out, but you get my point. And then, of course, you can right click the selection or just select one cell and right click to delete to shift it up one. And we're almost there, so we'd have to right click that cell to delete to shift it up one more to bring everything back to the way it was before we started the video. If you want to look up some data within your worksheet or your workbook for that matter, and you got a lot of data to go through, go ahead and use the Find feature. You can either come up here on the Home tab to the Editing group and click on Find and Select and choose Find. Brings up the Find and Replace window, or close out. The shortcut keys are Control F. And what do we want to find? Let's say we want to find 475. You can see it right there, 475. Hit Enter, and it finds the first one. Click Find Next to go to the next one, or better yet, click on Find All. And let me click and drag the title bar of the window so I can move the window. And down below, hover over the bottom border of the window until you can see arrows pointing in opposite directions. Click and drag to expand that down to see everything that it found that contains 475. And you can go ahead and click on the links there to advance right to it quickly. Now if I want to go ahead and replace this number, this value, with another, then come up here with the Find and Replace window open, click on Replace, and then type in a number, and then go ahead and click on Replace. Whatever cell it was in when you click Replace, it replaces it and goes to the next cell. So you can see over here it's 450. When I click Replace, well, the current cell that it's in right now is D18. It'll change that to 450, and then go to the next one. And if you got a lot to go through, just click on Replace All. And the remainder placements that were made were 5, so good, we're done. Now what about looking through the entire workbook? How do I do that? Well, let's go ahead and close out and see if we got anything else in the workbook, like on sheet 2. Hey, we've got a 450 there. Let's go back to sheet 1 and do Control F again and type in 450 and click on Find Next, or again, Find All. Go ahead and click and drag that up. Click and drag the border, the bottom of the window down so I can see everything there. And it's only looking in sheet 1. If I want to look in all the other worksheets within the workbook, then we need to open up the options and change it from within the sheet to the workbook and click on Find All, and it found that one on sheet 2, and you can see it says sheet 2 there. Click on it to go to it, and then click on it to go to the others back on sheet 1. And in addition to within, you can search by rows, by columns, or look in formulas, values, and comments. Or it has to be an exact match case or match the entire cell contents. And to keep it simple, how about we do one other? Instead of looking for a value, how about formats? So for example, if I go ahead and I'm looking for 450, and let's say I also want to look for a cell that contains the format, click on Format, a certain type of number format, alignment, font, borders. Let's keep it simple and select bold and click Okie dokie. And when I click on Find All, can't find anything that contains both the criteria 450 and also in bold the formatting here. You can see the preview of what I had selected. So if I delete what I'm finding here, that criteria, and I'm just looking for anything that's bold, click on Find All, it found the two. It's the titles for the mini databases, which is essential oils for US and the UK. You can go down to the UK. So you want to keep this in mind because if you go ahead and close the options so you can no longer see the formatting that it's still there, and you say, okay, I want to go ahead and look for 514, you can see it right there. I want to tell you about it so you know that it's there. 514, and click on Find Next. It can't find it. Why? Click Okie dokie, because when you expand the window here and click on Options, it's looking for the combination of 514 and the format, which is bold. So if we want to find that value here, and not any formatting with it, then we need to clear it. Click on the drop down arrow and clear the Find Format. And then we can go ahead and click on Find All, and it found it. Let's go ahead and change it up just a bit and delete 514. In fact, let's go ahead and close out. Let's apply some formatting to some of these cells here. And let's do red here and red there. Then go ahead and Control F. And instead of choosing the drop down arrow, to choose the format here, you can actually pull in the formatting from a selected cell without having to open up the window and say, okay, I want this formatting, because in a cell, you can have multiple formats applied to the same cell. You can have it in bold, in red, number type format. I mean, that's a lot to come and click on format and to bounce around from tab to tab to select all the formats. Instead, close out, go ahead and click on the drop down arrow and say that you want to choose the formatting from a cell. You can see that when I move my mouse, I've got the white cross. It's in selection mode, and I want to select this cell right here. You can see the eyedropper. When I click on it, it's going to go ahead and suck in the formatting from that cell into the eyedropper, and there's the preview right there. So that's what it's looking for. So when I click on Find All, there you go. It finds only the cells that contains the formatting that I pulled in by choosing it from this cell, and displays it down below here. So you've got the two here with the red font format. Now be sure to clear it, because if you don't and you keep Excel open and you try to look for something else, you won't be able to find it unless it has that formatting applied to it. The GoTo feature is just like it sounds. It's a quick way to go to a cell by using this feature. You can say, wait a second, what about the name box? Can I just click in there and type in the cell that I want to go to, like E13, and hit enter? Yes, you can, but the GoTo feature offers something just a little bit more that I think you might find interesting. For example, to go ahead and open up the GoTo feature, you can either come up here on the Home tab to the Editing group and click on Select and Find and go down to GoTo, or you can see in the pop-up the shortcut keys are Control-G, or you can just hit the F5 key on the keyboard. So click on GoTo, it opens it up, close out, or hit the F5 key on the keyboard, which is a lot faster. And the GoTo feature, what it does is that you can go ahead and type in the cell that you want to go to. Let me go ahead and click and drag the title bar of the window so I can move the window out of the way. And before I go to the cell, which is going to be Z5000, take a look at the cell that I'm currently in. It's E13. So let me go ahead and type in Z5000 and hit enter on the keyboard. It takes me to Z5000, but when I'm done within that area of the worksheet, I want to go back to where I came from, hit F5, and it keeps a history here of where I've been. It was first A1, then we went to E13, and then now that I'm coming from Z5000, that will be the next one when I go ahead and select if I want to go back to E13 and click Okie dokie. There we go. Of course, it takes me right to it. I'd have to scroll over and up to see the remainder of the database and then hit F5 again. And you can see there you go. Keeps track of a history of where I've been. And it's only for this session because once I close out of Excel, let me click Cancel and close out and then open it back up. Let me right click on the Excel icon on my taskbar to bring up the jump list and come up here and go to. Let me click on it to restore it. It brings it up. Or you can click on the File tab when you open up Excel and go down to Open. And it's got a list of the recent workbooks that you've been looking at, and the least of which is the GoTo. Let me click back. And so when I hit the F5 key on the keyboard, it's cleared out. Now there are permanent GoTos and there are temporaries. The temporaries is, well, the current session of where we've been. It keeps a history and it clears it out when we close out. The permanent ones are the name cells. Now we're going to talk about how to name a cell in a later training video, but to give you a synopsis of what it's about, Excel has its own name for each cell. So if I click in this cell, the name of it is H3, so I can tell where I'm at. Now you can go ahead and give it an additional name for that cell that makes sense to you, because when I'm thinking about going to the commission cell, I don't think H3. It'd be nice to have a name for the cell that calls it commission, or in this case, commission 1, because that's the first one here, the percentage, and then commission 2 could be for that cell, commission 3, 4, 5, or 6, or I can just have commission for the actual cell that has the text in it, COM1, and then that could be COM2, again abbreviated for commission 1, commission 2. So having said that, if I go ahead and select the cell and come up here in the name box and type in COM_1 and hit enter, it automatically accepts that in addition to the default name F3 for that cell. Now it also references COM1, and then come down here, come up here in the name box and type in COM_2 and hit enter. I can go to F3 or COM1 or go to J5 or COM2 or click on the drop down arrow to go to COM1 or go to COM2, and then if I hit F5, it remembers where I've been last because it keeps a history of it, and it's temporary, but these other two, these names that I gave it in addition to the default names, will always be there. Well, that is if I save it. If I don't save it and close out, they won't be there. Go to COM1, click Okie dokie, and there we go. So if I go ahead and I save it, and then I close out, and then I right click to bring up the jump list to go to the workbook, hit F5, they'll always be there until I go ahead and delete these names that I gave for these cells here. And again, we'll talk about that in a later training video and go over it more in depth. But to complete the GoTo training video, which can be a part of it, so when you look at this and you're in a workbook going, what the heck are these? If they're always there, even when you close out and reopen it, they're going to be a cell that somebody gave a name to, or it could be even a range of cells that they named. And then down below, you've got something special. Go ahead and click on it. If you want to go to comments that are within the worksheet, or constants or formulas, and you can go to formulas that contain numbers, text, logicals, errors, click Okie dokie, and it selects all these cells that contain formulas. That's pretty cool. So instead of using the shortcut key Control tilde to display the formulas and then Control tilde to collapse it, go ahead and use the GoTo. So in the special option of it, you can go ahead and select it, click Okie dokie, and it selects the cells that contains formulas without expanding the worksheet, and the other options that you get here as well, including the last cell that you were in. Hey, fancy. Let's click cancel. The Transpose Data feature allows you to take a range of data and actually flip it. For example, if I got a range here that I don't want the labels for the columns to be in this format up at the top for each column, and I want to flip it so the labels are on the left-hand side by rows, then go ahead and select the data range that you want to flip and right-click on it and go down to Copy, and then come down here in a cell, somewhere in a blank area where you've got some space, and then paste it. Now, not just a simple paste, it's got to be the transpose paste. And you can do that one of a couple of ways. You can either come up here on the Home tab and click Paste first, and then from the Paste options, choose Transpose, or click on the drop-down arrow and just choose it right there. There's Transpose. And you can see down below it's in preview mode before I click on it. Or you can come down here and right-click and also go to Transpose, and it gives you the preview before you click on it. And you see how it flips the labels for the columns over to the side here, now in rows. Well, go ahead and click on it, and there you go. And by the same token, we can select that and transpose that, and right-click on that selection. Go ahead and go to Copy and right-click in a cell down below and select Transpose right there, and we're back to where we had it originally in the database up above. Okay, let me go ahead and click and drag and select the ranges here. The only problems that I run into with this is that if I'm doing it with cells that contains formulas or functions. So for example, we've got, let's see, the month total and the month average. If I select this range here and I want to flip it, so instead of being in row format, I want it in column format. Well, let me show you. Right-click on the selected range, go to Copy, and let's come over here to give ourselves some space down below so when we transpose it, we've got some room. Right-click, go to Transpose, and what's happening? I mean, look at the value here. The first one, 4-month total, should be 741, but it's not. If I double-click on it, notice how it's coming down to that row. Let me hit the Escape key, double-click. Goes down to the next row. Let me hit the Escape key, double-click, and it goes down to the next row, so it transposed everything, including the range that it's looking at. If you do this, you want to go ahead and update your formulas here. And if you double-click, well, you can just go ahead and click and drag them so they go back up here to the correct range, and then hit enter, and there you go. 741.49 is exactly what we have there. And that's a simple formula. If I go ahead and use like these other formulas, and you can see up in the formula bar, and I want to transpose those where it says the max, the minimum, and I click and drag that range and right click to copy, to right click, to transpose. You see with the simple formulas it works, but with the maximum and minimum, when I double click, it doesn't even update with the range and transpose it to go row by row like it did over here with the more simplistic formulas. The functions, it chokes on it. So keep that in mind when you do that. Now to adjust your columns or rows, as far as making them wider or more narrow, you can hover in between the two column headers or row headers until you can see arrows pointing in opposite directions. Then go ahead and click the left mouse button, and you can see in the pop-up the measurement for that column, that even though it's between two columns, it's always going to be to the left. And if it's in between two rows, it's always looking at the row above it. So it's 11.71, and in pixels, it's 87. Go ahead and click and drag out the measurements update, or drag it in and let go. You can either eyeball it and do it that way, or if you have a specific measurement that you want to enter in numerically without, using the mouse, then go ahead and click anywhere within the cell or the row that you want to update the width or height thereof, and come up here on the Home tab to the Cells group, click on the Format drop-down arrow. There's for the row height or the column width. It opens it up, go ahead and type it in, or let me click Cancel. You can also right-click on the column header or row header and go down to column width or row height, and it brings up the same window. You can go ahead and type in 20, hit enter, and there you go. Let me go ahead and click and drag that in, because the other option that you get, if you've got data within a column and part of the data, like for essential oils, because it's so long, it goes into the next column, or maybe if we have data next to it, it cuts it off so I can't see it, but I want to see the longest data within that column, you can do what's called an auto fit. just hover in between the two column headers and double click really fast, and it fits to the longest cell that contains the data within that column, in this case essential oils US. Or if you're not good at double clicking really fast, your mouse is broken or it doesn't accept double clicks, you can come up here and click on the format drop down arrow and also do autofit for the row height or again for the column width. In fact, since we've been doing columns, let's go ahead and do it for a row here. Let's click and drag and select two rows, and let's click and drag down. And because I have both rows selected, what I do at the bottom, it duplicates in the row above, so that way you can go ahead and hit two birds or two rows with one stone or one drag here. And of course, if that doesn't work, we can go ahead and double click really fast in between the two row headers and it automatically does an autofit. And so it takes the largest or the tallest text within any row here and fits it to that. And since they're all the same height, well, we're back to where we started. And then finally, if you want to go ahead and hide some columns or rows, like let's say we're doing a presentation and we're talking about Q1, and so April isn't a part of Q1, let's go ahead and hide it. Right click on the column header, go down to hide. You can also do it for rows. So if we click and drag and select this range and right click on the row headers and go down to hide, there you go. So you can see that there's, well, you do your alphabet A, B, C, D, E, skip F and go to G, and then you can see rows 11 skips to 17. The question that I have is that when you hide columns or rows and you print it out, is it going to print it off or just what you see here? Well, to find out, click on the File tab, go backstage to print, and what you see in the print preview is what you get when you print. And you can see that, well, we don't have April, and we're missing all the rows down below. So let's go ahead and click back. And to unhide it, you can't just right click on any column and go, oh, let's unhide, because that ain't gonna work. What you gotta do is go ahead and select the column before or row before and drag over to the row after of what's hidden. So F is between E and G, so you want to select both and then right click on any one of those to unhide and it will display F. And the same, like I said, goes for the rows. We've got to select the row before, 11, and go down to 17. So when I right click, everything in between that's hidden and I unhide will be unhidden. And as a side note, if you want to hide your worksheets, you can right click on sheet 1 and go ahead and say hide, and it's gone. To unhide it, right click on any of the other worksheets, go to unhide, and it brings up a window that if you have more than one worksheet hidden, you can select which ones that you want to unhide and click okie dokie and it brings it back. And of course, if you don't have any worksheets to right click on to unhide, then you can come up here and click on the View tab, go to the Window group, and you've got your Hide and Unhide. Now to spell check your worksheet, come up here, click on the Review tab, go to the Proofing group, and click on Spelling. Or you can see in the pop-up, the shortcut key is F7. When you click on it, opens up the spell check window. And let me click and drag the title bar of the window so I can move the window out of the way. And you can see that it says Dreamforce isn't in the dictionary. And it gives me suggestions down below saying, hey, you should break it up, Dream space Force. If I don't want to do that, but I want to add it to the dictionary so it no longer sees it as a misspelled word, click on Add to Dictionary, and then it goes to the next cell that has a misspelled word, which is February. And here's some suggestions. Ooh, Brierary, I like that. I'll have to look that up. So go ahead and select what it needs to be, in this case February, and click Change. And then when it's done, okie dokie, and we're good. Now, if you accidentally made a mistake and you added this to the dictionary, Dreamforce is one word, and you want it to be two separate words, then to go ahead and to customize that and get it out of the dictionary, so when you hit F7 on the keyboard to do a spell check, it'll bring it up and say, okay, this is misspelled. Go ahead and close out. Click on the File tab, go backstage to Options, and choose Proofing. Come down here to Custom Dictionaries and select the default, click Edit, and you can see that my name is misspelled quite a bit, so I added it there. And then Dreamforce, go ahead and select it, delete it. Of course, you can go ahead and add Dreamforce again if you want, and click Add. But let's go ahead and select it, delete it, click okie dokie, and OK. And then go ahead and hit F7. And it says, look, you're right here. Do you want to go back to the beginning and check the rest that's above? Because wherever you're at, it spell checks it from that point down. And so we need to go back up and say yes. And because Dreamforce isn't in the dictionary, it sees it as misspelled. So again, I can add it or just ignore it once and not have to worry about it and be done with it. To modify fonts within your worksheet, it's really simplistic, and the reason why you may want to do it is to make it more aesthetically pleasing or look more organized. For example, I've got for the title of the worksheet, or this database that you're looking at is essential oils in the US. I'm looking at my column labels and row labels. I want them to stand out, so I can go ahead and click and drag and select them. Hold down the control keys so I can also select the row labels, and then to change the font formats for those cells, either come up here on the Home tab to the font group, and you can make them bold. Also click on the expandable dialog box button, and within the Font tab, change the font type. Again, you got the options for the style and then the size, and click Okie dokie. Or that doesn't look good. If you want to go ahead and clear that out, if you don't have the undo option, as you recall in an earlier training video, on the Home tab in the Editing group, you can click on the Eraser drop-down arrow and clear formats, and it gets rid of them. The other option is you can go ahead and right-click on the selection, bring up the mini formatting toolbar, make your changes there, or come down to Format Cells, and, well, we're on the Font tab, make your changes there as well. Let me close out. Now, if you want to change the formatting for the entire worksheet, not have to click and drag and drag and drag to select everything, you can either come up here and click on the Select All cell, which is between 1 and A, click on it, selects all, or you can use the shortcut key Control A, and when you do that, make sure that you're not within the mini database, because when you do Control A, it just selects that data range, okay, the adjacent cells, which, by the way, if you want to go ahead and do that, that's fine. But just click off and do Control A, and it selects the entire worksheet. And then you can go ahead and apply formatting for the entire worksheet. Click and drag, select a range, right-click, go down to Format Cells, and besides the font, you can do alignment if you want, and say, okay, I want to go ahead and shift this to maybe 48 degrees, and click Okie dokie. That doesn't look too bad. Or instead of going all the way to the Format window, you can just come up here on the Home tab to the Alignment group, and it's right there, and you can use their defaults, change it even to vertical text. Well, I'm getting outside of modifying the fonts here for the cells, but I thought it was something fun. Or you can go back to Format Cell Alignment, and you can type in 0 degrees if you don't want to click and drag the line here, but just type it in numerically, hit enter, and we're back to where we started. Now, numbers also have formats. For example, you can have date formats for dates, also for numbers here that you can see in cells from the months of January through April. How about if we display those in currency? To go ahead and apply a formatting to the numbers, select your range, come up here on the Home tab to the number group, and right now you can see it's general, the format. Click on the drop-down arrow, and you get a list of options here. Let's choose currency, and hey, there you go. Now, you would think that coming up here on the Home tab to the number group, clicking on the $ would be currency, but no, this is the accounting number format. Well, what's the difference? Let me go ahead and select this range and change it from currency to accounting. They both have $. What's the difference? Well, visually, if I go ahead and click and drag and open this up with the column that contains the accounting number format, as opposed to, let's do this column, that contains currency, the $ is way over to the far left for accounting and close up to the number for currency. Let's go ahead and hit undo a couple of times and select. You can select the entire range to find out which one's in currency, and it's not going to display it here. You just have to click in the cell to find out specifically what that cell is formatted for. In any case, go ahead and select them all if you'd like, if you're not sure, and select currency to make sure everything's in currency here. And even so, with currency, you can customize it or tweak it a little bit. If you go ahead and click on the expandable dialog box button for the number group, click on it, and it brings up the Format Cells window. Let me close out. You can also right-click on the selection and go down to Format Cells, brings up the same window. On the Number tab, you can see that currency is selected because that's what we have selected in our worksheet here. there's the sample of it. You can have, well, 2 decimal places or go to 0 and have it round to the nearest dollar. I'm going to go ahead and go back to 2 decimal places. And for the symbol, well, it's dollars. You can choose another country symbol here. Let me click off. And then if there's a negative number, do you want it with the minus sign in front of it, or do you want it in red, or do you want it in parentheses or parentheses and in red? Let me go ahead and click Okie dokie and type in -1. And there you go, it's in parentheses and in red, so you can go ahead and tweak it a little bit for the number format. Let me go ahead and hit undo. And as another example, we've got the date here. Let's go ahead and right click on that and see if we can customize it by clicking on Format Cells. Let me drag the window over here. We've got the date category selected. There's a sample of it. Do you want it in this format, or do you want to choose, ooh, that's a long format, Friday, May 15th, 2015. Sure, why not? Click Okie dokie, and anytime you see a cell that has pound symbols there, it may be that you actually typed in the pound symbol, or most likely it means that the data cannot all be seen within the size of the column there. And so you need to go ahead and open up the column more by clicking and dragging between the 2 column headers, so column A gets a little bit more room and can display all the information. In other words, it's not going to display Friday and May 15th and then go, okay, I guess that's all the data that's there, because that can be deceitful, especially if I go ahead and let's click in between the 2 column headers here, where you can see arrows pointing in opposite directions. Go ahead and click and drag, and when I collapse it far enough, what if it just gave me one number, like if I collapsed this and it just said $1? I mean, that's very deceptive. I could run into problems with that, and so that's why it says, hey, look, I'll just put in a bunch of pound symbols to make sure that you don't make any errors in judgment when it comes to eyeballing your numbers here and thinking that you just have $1 in sales that you made in the month of February, which wouldn't make sense, because if you had $1 here and $1 there and $1 there, the totals, it wouldn't jive, because the totals would still come up. It's just that when you're looking at the value itself in the cell, it looks like it may be a lot less than what you see. So you can either hover over it, you can see the pop-up for the cell if you don't want to widen the column where you can see all the data so it can all be displayed. And if you do, then come up in between the 2 column headers, click and drag, or do a double click really fast to do a best fit, and it takes the cell that contains the largest amount of data and fits it to that, because everything else will obviously fit if it fits it to the largest cell there. So between the number group here on the Home tab, if you have access to it and you feel comfortable, and some of the options there, the least of which is the cell that you have currently selected, the number format that's applied to it, and also decreasing and increasing decimals if that's applicable to the cell that you have selected. You can always right-click on the selection and select another category, and then if you want to get more detailed or customize the category that you selected, then come over here and make your updates. When you're done, go ahead and click OK, and there you go. By default, the number format's always going to be general. You can see when I select that cell up here on the Home tab in the number group, it's general, until we go ahead and select a range and change it to, as we did in the previous training video, currency. Well, here in this training video, I want to show you how you can create a basic custom number format. In other words, I'm looking at the range here of employee IDs, and I'm thinking it's the Social Security number because it's got the same amount of numbers there. So I want to go ahead and format it so it has the dashes in the right place, and in fact, so there's no mistaking that it's the Social Security number, at least when I customize it. I could go ahead and customize it so it says Social Security here, or just SS, I mean, whatever I want to customize it with. And to do that, go ahead and select the range that you want to customize, right-click on it, go down to Format Cells. Let me click and drag the title bar of the window up so I can center the window. And before I go to Custom, I know that there are some special formats, the least of which is Social Security number, so that worked out well. And you can see the dashes there. So after I have something selected and then I want to customize it, come down to the Custom category, and you can see the type field is already populated with that special number format. And so if I want to add any text in front of the number, like Social Security, let's go ahead and use open quotes, SS, close quotes, space, and you can see it up in the sample above. Without the quotes, it will show nothing. So let's go ahead and click Okie dokie, and hey, that's cool. And in fact, when you select the cell, you can see up here in the formula bar, it doesn't show the text. So if you want to customize it and say, okay, I don't want it to have SS, I want it to have EID for employee ID, you can't do it in the formula bar because it's a custom number format that the text was in quotes. We have to go back to the Format Cells window and update it there. So just for laughs, let's come down here and type in another number and see how it works when we apply the formatting. And there's numerous ways you can copy the format for one cell and paste it on the other, which, by the way, I just gave it away, copy and paste. Go ahead and right-click on the cell, go to Copy, right-click on the cell, and in the Paste options, look for the paintbrush, select that, and it just copies over the formatting. Sweet. Let me go ahead and hit Undo and hit the Escape key. The other way that you can do it is select the cell, come up here on the Home tab to the clipboard, and use the painter. It's called the Format Painter. What it does is when you click on it, whatever cell you have selected, the brush gets dipped into that format, and so now it's on the brush, and then you can go ahead and select another cell to apply that format to. Pretty sweet. Or better yet, let me go ahead and hit Undo if you want. You can just right-click, go to Format Cells, select Custom, scroll down, find your custom format number, select it, and click Okie dokie, and that works too. And then for laughs, how about if we want to go ahead and find all our custom number formats and replace them with something else because, hey, we've got a lot of number formats. I don't want to go to each one, or if they're in non-consecutive cells where I can't click and drag to select them, we can do a quick find and replace. So let's go ahead and do Control F to bring up the window. And we want our options. Let me click and drag the window into the center. And then click on Format, go to Custom, and we want to find the SS format here, click Okie dokie, and we want to replace it with, so click on the Replace tab, click on Format, go to Custom, scroll down, choose our custom number format again, and let's delete the SS and let's just add EID for employee ID. Click Okie dokie, say Replace All. 5 replacements were made, click OK, close out, and there you go. Thanks for watching. Hey, as a quick reminder, if you like my video, please give it a thumbs up. You can also click on me and subscribe to my channel to get notified of the latest videos. And for great specials on my products, please see the description below this video.